This is a video guide on the RallyHere Integration Quick Start. I'm going to be starting here from the docs.rallyhere.gt website on our welcome page, at least currently. We have a link to our RallyHere Integration Quick Start guide, so I'm going to go there. We'll be running through this guide in this video. This guide is made in November 2024, and we'll be using Unreal Engine 5.4.4. We'll be making a test project, integrating RallyHere into it, and then getting to the point where we can log in and log into our API, and we will be doing that through the debug tool and getting to the point where we are able to then access our API and utilize it. So again, I'll be using the Unreal Engine's the Epic Games Launcher's version of Unreal Engine. You can also use this through the GitHub or licensee versions. I'm just using this one for simplicity. Let's start going through the guide. So first of all, we've got a couple prerequisites in the guide. In this case, we've got some connectivity configuration. I'll be going through this a little bit later, but it can be found on our developer website once you have signed up and received an environment. Everything has been pre-created for us, so I'll just be pulling the statement directly. We will need Unreal Engine 5 with the ability to compile some C++ code. I'll be getting that through the Epic Games Launcher. I've already downloaded in this particular case. We'll need the RallyHere SDK, which I will retrieve in a moment. The latest release is always at this URL. So first of all, let's go ahead and make our sample project. I'm going to go ahead and launch the engine test project. We don't need starter content. I'm just going to be naming this start guide. I'm just doing it with everything default. Go ahead and create, and it'll create the project for me. In this case, we need a C++ project because the RallyHere SDK is distributed as a non-precompiled Unreal plugin. So we will be needing to download it and install it and compile it, which we'll be walking through in the guide. Letting this boot up. And this may take a second, so we'll probably pass the code through this. While that is downloaded, or while that is doing the initial engine build, I'm going to go ahead and grab the Unreal SDK. The latest version is always available at the link that's in the guide. It is publicly available on GitHub. I'll be downloading the source code version of it right here. Once it's downloaded, I will go ahead and open it. And we can see here that there's a bunch of files present. And once the editor finishes booting up, I'm going to wait for the editor to finish booting up before I start installing the plugins, just to make sure everything is in a good state. All right, this will probably be a minute or two while it compiles the shaders. That takes a second.
Does it show a percentage?
It's showing a countdown right here.
Yep.
It's nearing done.
Okay.
This is one of those first-time problems, or like it won't do this the next time. The first time you make any project in the engine, it has to get through this. $6,000 down to about 200, looks like. I think. Yeah, 204, so it's almost done.
Circling back to the guide itself, Chris, you had mentioned it is to get a team authenticating with our API, specifically our Anon service, right? Where it's a basic username, password authentication, and then snapping on like Steam auth or Xbox auth, PlayStation auth.
All right, so picking back up where we left off, the editor is now fully booted. In this case, this is just the raw vehicle template from the editor. In theory, if I hit play here, it should just drop me in as a car, but we haven't integrated the actual SDK yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close out of the editor now that we've got our project. This is the projects folder created. I'm going to open that and make a new folder here if it doesn't already exist. In this case, it's a brand new project that doesn't exist. I'm going to name it plugins. And then I'm going to go to the SDK that I downloaded earlier and grab the plugins folder. I'm going to drop it in to the plugins directory over here. Our plugins by default are enabled by default. Once this finishes copying over, I should be able to restart the editor and it will prompt me to compile them, at which point it will build them, boot up the editor, and we will continue. For clarity, I'm going to rename this to RallyHere plugins. And inside of it will have our normal plugin group. This is just a grouping folder. And we launch the editor again. Select our project and launch it. It prompted me that the RallyHere plugins are needed to be built. I'm going to select yes. The rest should be pretty straightforward. This is the last major build step. The build's complete, letting the header boot back up. All right, and we're back. The editor's booted and it has the RallyHere plugins built and enabled. So we'll be resuming from our guide while the editor is finishing its startup. So if we go back to the guide, we've now installed the plugin files to the plugins folder. There is a note here that you can install it as an engine plugin if you would like. In this case, I'm installing it to the game project because that is required for the Epic Game Store launcher. Once we have it installed, we now need to do some configuration. A good number of these can be completed through the editor. That's one of the reasons we have it booted up here. So I'm going to go back to the editor. I'm going to go to settings in the top right, and I'm going to go to project settings, which is the second option. I'll open up the settings page. We're going to scroll all the way down to plugins, and we're going to select RallyHere Integration Settings. The other RallyHere segments also have some specific use cases. We won't be covering them here today. So the first thing we need to do is we need to configure the ability to connect to our API. And this can be done in a couple different ways. The way that we're going to be doing today is we're just going to set some default configuration here. If you want to instead use named presets, you can use this environment configurations array here to give them names. So in this case, we need to get the base URL, and normally we put in a client and secret. I'm going to show you where to get those, but I'm not actually going to be using them today. So first, in order to get the base URL, I'm going to go to our developer portal, which is right here. And in the top right, there's this environment info dropdown. I'm going to go down to base URL. I'm going to hit the copy button. I'm going to go back to project settings. I'm going to paste that into the base URL field. And I'm going to make sure that it starts with https :/ like so. I said it's in the client and secrets fields. I'm not going to use them today, but they are also gotten through our developer portal. So the way that you would get those is you go to your project, you would go to clients, and here we have a couple different clients. I would choose, for in this case, the game client. The ID I need for the client is right here. And the secret you would get by rotating the secret. Clicking this button, it'll pop up a ability to rotate the secret and copy it. I'm not going to do that today because that will break other logins to this particular environment. Now that we've got this base URL configured, we go back to our guide. We can see that I configured the base URL here, and as we're going to be skipping these two for today. There's also a couple other items I need to do. So I need to configure the local player class. We provide a sample local player, but if you have your own custom local player class, we need you to either extend from ours or implement an interface. You can do either. The guide details both. In this case, I'm going to be doing the simple case. So I'm going to go to project settings. I'm going to go to general settings in the engine, which is near the top. So scroll back up. Let's see. general settings in the engine section. And I'm going to go to the local player class. Here's local player variants. As such, that's going to require a restart. We will deal with that in a moment. I also need to set the IP configuration class. That actually requires editing the INI, so I will do this restart now. I'm going to restart later, and we'll do the INI edits first, and then close out of the editor. I am going to go to my project folders. I'm going to go to the config and open up the default engine. This is the default engine that was auto-generated for my project when I created my default project. I just need to copy this segment and add it to the end. I'm just going to copy and paste it into the bottom of this file. There's a couple other things we're going to be doing here as well. This can be done in the main default engine. There's a couple cases where you might want to do it in another file. I'm just going to put in the normal default engine. This enables cross-play between the various platforms we support. So it allows various types of entities to be shared. And because of some issues with the Steam sockets, I'm going to disable the Steam socket subsystem. That can cause issues if you have non-Steam clients wanting to play with Steam clients. The other thing I'm going to do, and this is normally only needed for Steam, and today we're not going to be using Steam, but I'm just going to do it to show the guide. This sets the token type that the Steam library returns, or the Steam part of the engine returns, to be a different type, to be the type that we support. It's required if you want to log in with Steam. And that is all the changes we need to make to this INI. So it's just the NetDriver, the online interface, and the Steam settings. So I'm going to save this file and then launch the engine again. The final thing we need to configure is back in the settings. I should be able to configure that and then immediately start up the game. While the engine is booting, we do have a set of recommended engine changes. These are some bug fixes and other useful things in the engine. They're not required for this demo or this quick start guide, but they are useful and available at this link in the guide. Right now that the engine's booted back up, and we're back to our settings page. We want to swap out the default game mode that we'll be using. This is not required, but we consider it a good use case because it handles a bunch of cases around automated shutdowns that we would prefer to handle gracefully. So in order to do that, we're in our world settings, which is over here. I'm going to set this world to use game mode. We're just going to ignore that for the moment because in this case, we don't need it. There's a game mode. If you change your game modes to extend from it, it will handle a bunch of the automated shutdown for you. Otherwise, you could end up with servers running on a cloud that are not hosting any players and just costing money. Now that we've got everything integrated, I'm going to go ahead and fire up Plain Editor again. This also works if you're running a client. It also can work on other platforms, including quick platforms, if you compile it in. By default, our debug tool, which I will be using, is compiled out of test builds and shipping builds. That can be changed as needed. So default, our debug tool is available on the F7 key. You can also get to it via the console by saying rh.toggle debug tool. And it will open up the debug tool. In this case, my windows are a little bit messed up because of resolution. So I'm going to hit reset windows at the top left. And it will put the debug tool in its normal layout. At this point, we now have the debug tool present. We've not logged in yet. This is just the debug tool. There will be another guide exploring how to use this debug tool. But in this case, we're going to go up to login. And notice up here it says the login OSS name is null. That's the default for the engine. And we didn't change it. We need to set it to a login type that we will use to log in. In this particular case, I'm going to be using a special login type that provides for developers. This is normally disabled in shipping environments. So I can use this console RallyHere.set OSS to anon. And that switches our login type to anon. Now I can mark myself as accepting the various agreements. And I'm just going to type in a debug username. Let's just call it Quick Start. I'm going to hit login. And you can see that this populated with a bunch of IDs and such that shows me that I'm now, as it says, logged into RallyHere. I now have access to the full suite of tools that the client would have access to. That includes, for example, coming to the config tab and seeing key value configurations. You can set the debug total. I can come to the catalog tab and get vendor data that can be used for purchasing. I can come to the sessions tab and potentially, and this is where you would go to set up gameplay between multiple clients or create sessions and do matchmaking. This concludes the Quick Start guide. At this point, we have now logged in and full access to the entire debug tool. It can be used as a reference for how to do a lot of calls within the SDK as well. It is all straight up Unreal code that can just be browsed and cribbed from at your leisure. This concludes the Start guide.